everyone focuses on the AI. It's not about the AI, it's about the human. The biggest issue around adopting AI is
Meet Craig Granowitz, Chief Medical Officer at Lexicon Pharmaceuticals, who has built an extraordinary career across medicine, biotechnology, sales, marketing, and executive leadership. From treating patients to leading global pharmaceutical businesses, he brings a unique perspective on innovation and leadership.
AI is a distillation of information. I won't even call it knowledge because I don't think it's knowledge. When I look across functional areas, which is where the real value gets added in an organization, AI currently is coming up short. I like to learn new things. I think that intellectual curiosity is fundamental to working in a knowledge-based industry. You got to be in a culture that really works for you, and if you're not, you got to leave that culture.
Where are you stuck, and what's the biggest opportunity going forward? What's the potential breakthrough that you have as you look to the future?
Where we are now is what I would call this very granular.
Welcome to the Digital Adoption Accelerator podcast. I'm your host, Jake Herway, Managing Partner, Healthcare Innovation at Value Add Group. I'm very excited to be joined today by Craig Granowitz. Thank you for coming.
Well, thanks, Jake. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I really appreciate what you try to bring to the world in terms of perspective on using technology and digital adoption and really bring it to a pharmaceutical audience, because I think you understand the intersection between the technology, but also have a deep appreciation of the great work that people in the industry do, and synergizing those together, I think, is really important. So thank you for all the work that you do.
Oh, you're welcome, Craig. I look at your role currently as Chief Medical Officer at Lexicon, and having played that role at prior organizations at Merck, which is just up the street from both of us, the experiences you had been rich. And then, of course, your medical career as a physician. So you are one of many who have dedicated their lives to saving lives and improving the well-being of the world through your career. The thanks really is mine and ours as a society. Really excited to have the conversation with you.
Well, thanks, Jake. And, what's really motivated me throughout my career, and I just sort of see this current role as another stop on that journey, is how can, I as an individual best utilize the medical system and the economic system in which we work to improve the lives of as many patients as possible. And I've been really fortunate to have had a lot of experiences. I trained as a MD and a Ph.D., but my undergraduate degree, also minor in economics, and worked for a biotech company for 3 years. And throughout my medical school training, I worked part-time at Pfizer, that role in a medical capacity. But for me, even though I have a Ph.D. in molecular biology and biophysics and an MD degree, I thought the best way that I could improve the lives of patients was through a private market and through working in the biotech and pharmaceutical industry. Unless you can create a compelling business case and economic value, innovation doesn't get adopted. And I think that was one of the things I found potentially most frustrating working in academics was, at the end of the day, innovation doesn't mean anything if it's just published in a paper and can't be brought to the lives of patients. And I thought the way to do that really was to work in the private sector, where you align patient need and economic profitability ultimately in the private sector to actually bring innovation to patients. And that's been really a driving principle for all the work I've done throughout all the roles I've had, whether they're a sales role, marketing role, business head, medical affairs, chief medical officer. It's always been really focused on that same synergy of innovation, technology, adoption, and diffusion all together.
Craig, I couldn't agree more. The reality is to make something productive, you've got to make it profitable. And if it's not profitable, then we can't continue to provide it to the world. And sometimes those can feel like they're in contradiction to each other. But I imagine that in your career, you've probably faced that contradiction or other challenges as you've been drawn to the pharma industry and built your leadership and your legacy. I'm curious if there have been challenges, that or others, that have shaped you and how you lead today.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that I learned when I was on the commercial side, and again, I started as a sales rep, I went up through marketing. I spent 15 years of my career, ultimately was the head of global business unit that was a couple $1 billion in revenue at Schering-Plough. So I spent a lot of my time, really the first half of my career, in sales and marketing before moving over to medical affairs and then sort of the medical side of things. I think what I've learned throughout my career, whether I've worked on the commercial side or the medical side, is there is no cutting corners, and when you try to cut the corner in one way or another, whether it's compliance or do the less than right study in my current type of capacity, you never come out ahead. You might think you're going to come out ahead in the short term, but in the long run, you got to do the right thing. And, whether that's, I'm going to stick within the promotional guidelines when you're on the sales and marketing side, or you're not going to tell your customer what they want to hear. You're going to be honest and forthright, or whether you're dealing with how am I going to design this clinical trial, and can I sort of get away with something that I think I can sort of squeak it through. At the end of the day, that there is a way of truing things ultimately true up. And I think doing the right thing by people is always the way ultimately to get ahead. A good negotiation isn't grinding the person on the other side of the table into the ground. It's creating a win-win, ultimately where both sides come out ahead, no matter who that customer is, whether it's a regulatory authority, a prescribing physician, a business partner, a vendor. It's always the same.
That abundance mindset that you have, I'm sure, has served you well. It resonates with my experience as well. If we're going to win, we win together.
It's organizationally dependent, Jake, and I think that is really important. And my advice to people is you got to be in a culture that really works for you. And if you're not, you got to leave that culture, because there are cultures that do have different perspectives, and those make it, very difficult, especially in the short term, if that's, winning, if people feel like they're more profitable or something. And that's a dynamic tension that I think is not sustainable for someone that just doesn't want to be in that environment. You might get away with something like taking advantage of someone in a business negotiation, or getting someone to prescribe something, or getting something on formulary, but people have a way of remembering, and the truth sort of bears out over time.
And in the end, our reputation is all we have.
Well, especially in this industry, like any industry, it's a small world, and we all make mistakes. And certainly I've made many of mine, and I'm sure there are people that felt like I wasn't, fully forthright or whatever over time. And if that happened, I apologize to those people. I really do. And I think we just try to learn and get better over time. But I think the intent's got to be right. That's the most important thing.
As we've had our conversations around AI, Craig, you've brought in a lot of the human side that sometimes is overlooked, or if it's seen, it's not understood. And you've talked about even intent here as you're sharing it, how it plays into AI. I'm curious how you got involved in AI in the first place, or why you're drawn to it, why it's a priority topic for you.
I think it's both general and specific. First and most importantly, I like to learn new things. I think that intellectual curiosity is fundamental to working in a knowledge-based industry. I mean, all the value we create is largely intellectual property. I think you see that in the cost of goods of a molecule compared to the
Yeah.
selling price. It's all IP. And AI, in a sense, is a distillation of information. I won't even call it knowledge, because I don't think it's knowledge, and we can come back to that. So I think it was sort of a general interest that you see all of this discussion, you see this massive investment of capital all of the social, political, economic implications of it, or at least discussion of it, everything from it's going to create, Armageddon, that our world's going to end, to it's going to create another Garden of Eden and everything in between, depending upon who you listen to. Then there's sort of what I would call the granular detail of what work can it replace on a day-to-day basis. And then there's the issue of, synergy. So to me, there's sort of three layers as I look at it. The first is overall from a sort of societal perspective of, what is this going to do to our society and what's it going to do to me? The second is on a very, very narrow basis, like what work process is this going to replace or minimize so that I can have people do other things? And then the third is there something as you ladder up within an organization, something that I'll have insight that I otherwise would not have had at all? So that's how I've tried to approach AI, is on all three of those levels simultaneously.
I'm curious what has surprised you as you've continued down this journey at each level, perhaps, or what is it as you've been trying to roll out AI that has most surprised you?
That middle area, which I think is the most human, and I'm sure we'll come back to that as well, which is the unique insight that actually moves things forward. I mean, it's one thing to remove a work process or, reallocate someone's time or save a little bit of money. I would call that of, there's 10 different ways to get to your destination on the roads, and can you save 5 minutes off? It's a totally different way of saying I'm going to fly versus drive. What I would call the insight, the novel insight, is the area where I think I've become more and more attuned to. AI is not going to do that. It's the human element that's going to do it. And the question is, will AI enable the human being to do it better? But it's not going to be the AI that's going to come up with the insight. I'm not a coder, but I think AI might be able to do sort of the nuts and bolts of coding, from what I understand, more effectively. But the algorithm and the idea and the purpose has to come from the human being, that insight. And I think people are looking to AI to sort of do what I would call the most important value add, which is that component of it. And I think that is perhaps an unrealistic expectation. And thank God it might be an unrealistic expectation, because that is what I think is fundamentally drives people.
So tell me more about this. And if you have a specific example or some way of helping bring it to life for me, there is something about what I call the human work that needs to be done so that AI works for us, not against us. So if you would, can you tell me more about how you're seeing this human work show up for good or for bad and what it means?
Yeah, I'll start with a sort of a very tactical insight, and I call it the more metaphysical, which I think is far more important. When I look at individual tasks, so in my role, I have multiple different functional areas under my area of responsibility, whether it is clinical development, statistics, safety, quality, medical writing, medical affairs, like there's a lot of different functional areas. I think within those functional areas, I see areas where AI is going to make a difference. It's going to allow us to be more efficient. But when I look across functional areas, which is where the real value gets added in an organization, right? There's the issue of tactical execution, and that might be potentially somewhat cost savings, but not real, what I would call long-term value add. I think that's the area where AI currently is coming up short, and I'm not sure I see simple solutions to that, because when I talk to a lot of vendors and go to other meetings, I think everyone's struggling with that same issue. I think sort of taking it to a human being level, I see a mirror of that, and I was just reading an article when we were in the green room before starting that I thought really summed it up well, by a guy named David Brooks, who does a lot of writing, and it's been in, a number of publications and things. The analogy is that the brain is like a muscle. And the question is, are you going to use AI as a tool to replace the muscle, or are you going to use it as something to help train the muscle to be more effective? And I think for most people, unless you're really intellectually curious, that you like the struggle of thinking through things, which is hard work. I think if that is the type of person you are, I think AI is going to be extraordinarily enabling and can really help you be far more successful. But I think if you're someone that just wants to use it to sort of replace work, I see that individual as actually being more stressed over time because all you're doing is replacing tasks. And then with that time, you're going to get more tasks. And I sort of see that as a parallel from the work issue is, do we look across the organization and really add value add, which is that hard brain work of saying, how do I get these pieces to work together far more efficiently and far more effectively, get me something I never could have gotten otherwise? Versus, is it just going to allow me to not have to have someone spend 2 hours going through a clinical study report or something, and they can use 15 minutes to check it. But if it's not going to be value add, then someone's just going to give them another clinical study report, and they're frankly going to be working harder and being more frazzled than they were before. It's not that you're going to get that 2 hours back for yourself anymore. That time is going to get filled with something else, which I think is going to make most people feel even more pressured and more chaotic in their work life.
Wow, Craig, that is one of the chapters in my book, Don't Confuse Complexity with Productivity. And it talks about the vacuum and the washing machine and the phone. And yet somehow we're busier than we've ever been. That prediction, that foresight, I think you're exactly right. It is interesting because AI does require, in order for it to be productively applied, it requires a discipline in thinking and a willingness to do the work was that will truly differentiate. And so this, I often say it's an upgrade in the human is required to be able to handle this upgrade in technology that we're facing right now, AI. Without that upgrade, the chasm is just going to grow in between those that perform and those that get overwhelmed in complexity.
And I think, Jake, that's the issue with AI. I think everyone focuses on AI. It's not about the AI, it's about the human. I think you just captured it really well in what you said. It's the biggest issue around adopting AI is adopting the people to effectively use the AI. And I think a lot of that is innate. Like, are you a hungry person, intellectually hungry, intellectually curious, and wants to do the work? It's like, the analogy I've heard a number of times, and it's kind of trite, but I think it makes sense, is why does somebody run a marathon, right? It's 26 miles. You can get in your car and get there with no effort and a whole lot faster. But the point is, the journey is life. The journey is what motivates people, and the journey is what drives great corporate long-term performance. And I think we are spending so much time talking about the AI models and what this model can do and not do. It can only do what the human being is enabling it to do. It's not going to replace people. So the question is, like, I think making it practically, as opposed to asking AI, what's the answer to my question, or write this for me. One of the things I've started trying to do more is enable me to think through this better. So as opposed to asking, how does this work? I know there's a couple people that have worked in this area. People, direct me to their writing or direct me to what you think are some of the best writings on this area. And then I can read it and learn it far better and sort of internalize it, as opposed to the answer is whatever some paragraph that some AI model spits out with the answer. And I think the key is, as an effective user of this technology, is to be able to do both. Sometimes I just need an answer, but most of the time, the value add that I think most of your listeners get paid for in their work lives is come up with a different way of doing it and motivating a team to get there and get high performance. It's completely different.
So in your experience with that mandate, as you said, you have multiple functions underneath you and adoption is the opportunity. I like how you flipped it. It's not about adopting AI. It's about human adoption, human adopting to AI. So in this leadership, and what's the biggest opportunity going forward? What's the potential breakthrough that you have as you look to the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think where we are now is what I would call this very granular way of it's going to replace narrow work activity, which is what I think a lot of people spend a lot of their time functionally doing. It's knowledge transfer, knowledge checking, but I would call it sort of important iterative process. I think there it's pretty good. So, for example, if I want to run a clinical trial, can we adopt AI to do better pre-screening of patients to have a higher yield of patients that are going to qualify for the study and apply that to the site so that they can go through their potential patient inventory to better identify who they might want to offer this trial to, okay? That to me, like, it's a functional, narrow thing. I think it's great, but I don't think that's what people are thinking about for AI. The real issue is how do I really get this to think about 3 or 4 different trial designs that might be better and more effective to answer the question in the lowest risk, lowest cost, most rapid fashion? That's huge high value. AI is nowhere near. I think from an organizational standpoint, we got to figure out a totally different way to motivate people and help them motivate themselves to see how AI can be enabling them to grow far further than just, well, you're not going to have to spend 4 hours going through, whatever report you're writing looking for typos. That actually is a treadmill to tremendous unhappiness because all you're going to do, as what you've said before, is now you're going to get 4 times as many reports to review and you're going to feel more fragmented and frazzled than ever. And I think most people are going to end up using AI in that way as opposed to the other way. And I think the opportunity and challenge is for each individual person to try to think about their role, not as, gee, it's going to replace this task. I'm going to have this free time, but it's going to help me think better that I'm going to come up with a totally different way of doing something that is far more satisfying for me personally and far more value add for my organization. That's hard.
It's really hard, Craig. And when it works, extremely liberating and energizing. We found is I've mentioned to you before the James Clear model, where the core work is at an identity level and a relationship. What's my relationship with AI? Who am I in this world of AI? What do I contribute? And that leads to habits that lead to outcomes. That's what I heard in your conversation. Save 4 hours. Then what? And when we take it the other direction, the way you're talking about, inside out, where am I going? What do I stand for? What am I trying to accomplish? Who am I in relation to this AI? That clarity of identity naturally brings habits and behaviors like you're talking about, the discipline to think, the critical thinking required to use AI in a way that is productive. I couldn't agree more with your synthesis of the opportunity going forward. What you're experiencing, I think we're all experiencing, not only within the industry, but societally. And the opportunity is for us to think deeper and better about who we are, what we're trying to accomplish, and how AI is going to help us get there.
I think that's well said, Jake. Some of these things are very hard to teach and manage into people because a lot of it is innate. I tell people all the time, you get asked, what are your success criteria? And to me, it's really, really simple. There's really 3: curiosity, tenacity, and courage. And so to me, the foundation is curiosity,
Yeah.
especially working in a knowledge-based business in this point in time. Curiosity is everything, right? You want to do the work. You want to use that brain muscle in a really fundamental way because that gives you satisfaction. If you have curiosity and you own it because you're curious, you want the answer, you're going to be tenacious. You're going to go at it. You're not going to give up because you innately want to solve this issue. You want to get the answer. And you'll also be courageous because you're going to be willing to see stuff through. You're going to be willing to make decisions or speak up or say things that you wouldn't otherwise do. But the underlying motivator I see is the same thing as effectively utilizing AI. You've got to be someone that really wants to seek knowledge. You want to use the brain as the muscle. You want to run the marathon. You want to do the training because, as you said, life, and again, I don't want to get too metaphysical here, but life is ultimately about the journey. I think we get so focused on the destination of, did I get this bonus? Did I get this job? Life is really satisfaction about the journey. However you define the journey in that is meaningful for you. And I think using AI is the same thing.
Greg, love the framework. I'm going to call it the CTC framework: curiosity, tenacity, courage. I finish all the podcasts and all my coaching relationships with this advice because I think it sums up what you're talking about and carries on that courage piece. But if we're going to succeed in this disruptive era, in this AI era, this habit needs to be adopted. And that is to do one thing that scares you every day. We're following that advice, doing one thing that scares us every day. As I've observed people working with and adopting AI, been a key unlock for many. So with that, Craig, thank you very much. Love the thinking and couldn't agree more with your perspective. Thanks for being on the show with us.
Thank you, Jake. Appreciate it.